Oops. Sorry, I started recording on my computer too. Just in case.
No, it's perfect.
This is great. So many people joining us. Welcome, everyone. I see Kai and Silas and Brenda, Sue, Zhenyu, Michelle, Elva. I love the icon there. Zhao, Ben, Selena, Christina, Lucy. Wow, this is wonderful. Beryl, Rian. I've got to keep scrolling here. Jing Jing, Alice, Xinran, Xingqi, Corinne is in here. Yitang, Ying, Ileana, fantastic. Yeah, we got people talking in the chat. Awesome. Daisy's here. Yeah, Yiru, we have men as well. Isn't that wonderful? Yeah.
Brilliant. We will, if everyone can hear me, we will start in about a minute or so.
Yeah, see Jenny. What a great group. Debbie, Amy.
People are still coming in.
Yeah, Charlene,
Right.
Qin, Mingwei, they're still connecting to audio, so they can't hear me.
Right. We'll give it another 30 seconds.
Yeah, Yan Wei, I love that red hat. And you can't tell today I'm wearing blue, but red is my favorite color. Very Chinese.
That's great.
Thank you.
That's the only right answer.
Yeah, reminds me of when my husband, who's American, Western European descent, we were sending out our wedding invitations, and they were this hot pink with gold letters, and he had this and his side of the family, I just imagine them it's not like the typical American wedding invitation, which is usually quite white background, very elegant.
Brilliant.
Selena says the barcode seems to be expired, and Kai as well.
Oh,
QR code.
Probably not updated. If you guys are interested in the groups, just email us on office@ukcwc.org or follow us on social media. One of the committee will get back to you.
brilliant. Wow, I think we have a really great number of people in the audience. So why don't we make a start? Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon. And thank you for joining us for a special event with the much anticipated guest speaker, May. I'm Lin Yue, your host today. For those who don't know me, I have been working at Goldman Sachs in sales for the last decade and have been a champion for women that advocate for diversity and a speaker on democratizing the knowledge of career development. Today's event was made possible by 3 distinguished networks: the UK Chinese Women Connect, the Chinese Women in the City, and Women in Banking and Finance Lean Circle. Together, they have formed a very powerful force of women in Britain, and we would like to thank them for their dedication and support for our communities. The format of today's event will be a fireside chat, and I will ask May some questions about her career, her insights on the topic on how to find our voice. We will leave time for Q&A towards the end, but we would love to hear your thoughts, be it your aha moments, things that resonated, or also your questions. So please do feel free to put them in the chat box where I will moderate it towards the end. And please be mindful that today's session will be recorded. Now, I know you can't wait to hear about the session and then the practical tips from our speaker. So let me introduce her. Our guest speaker today needs very little introduction. She's a long-term friend who has been incredibly supportive of me over the years. So it's been a real pleasure having her here with us today. And let me provide you a quick introduction of her experience, because while this is slightly lengthy, I promise every bit of her experience is both fascinating and relevant for our conversation today. May was one of the most senior executives in investment banking, most recently as the Chief Operating Officer for Morgan Stanley in Europe. During this time, she chaired the firm European Diversity Council and was a member of the firm's European Management Committee. Prior to that, May spent most of her career in client-facing roles, advising senior clients and major corporations globally. After 24 years in investment banking, she had reinvented herself to be an inspirational executive coach, an author, and a senior advisor to the president of Arizona State University. As an executive coach and author, she's the founder and host of Career Mastery Kickstart. This popular online summit helped mid-career professionals perform at their best. An impressive over 20,000 professionals have benefited from the summit. As a graduate of Harvard and Harvard Business School, May's current mission is helping people succeed in their career and life to be better, do more, and make the difference they're meant to make. So with that, may I say a big welcome to the event.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and welcome to everyone. I appreciate your lovely introduction, and it has been, we've been friends for a long time now, and I've really enjoyed being part of your career journey.
Absolutely.
From the sidelines.
We're here to share more from what I have really benefited over the years. I thought maybe we can start with your career because, many of us are trying to break the glass ceiling and the bamboo ceiling, which is even harder. But for you, not only have you broken 2 ceilings, you smashed them. I felt like ceilings don't exist for you. It's more like a dot. So we would love to start a conversation on your career at Morgan Stanley. After listening to your experience, I think there are at least 3 things that jump out for our audience today. 1 is the client-facing component. 2 is getting to the managing director promotion. And 3 is to get to the senior management position. And perhaps maybe we can start with that client-facing role. Because, from my own observation, as you know, that I'm in a client-facing role. When I joined 10 years ago, I was the only Chinese. And 10 years later, I'm still the only Chinese. So seems like there is a barrier for people of similar background. So I wonder, how did you kind of navigate that, specifically as we might not seen as a strong communicator to begin with?
Yeah, this is such a interesting set of ideas that we're going to talk about right now and today, Lynn, because the whole idea of ceilings and barriers, they do exist, and in some other senses, sometimes we can also see ways to go around them, and so that they aren't really barriers in the end. So yes, there are things that are always going to be obstacles to each of us, but then there are also, most of the time, ways to go around it. There's the front door, there's the back door, there's a side window, there's down the chimney, and so forth. But on the client-facing side, for me, it was really leaning into the things that I really do best. And I don't know whether there's some correlation between what others of us who are of Asian descent feel like we do best. But for me, and it sounds like for you, Lynn, the thing that I did a lot of experimenting, and it turns out that my quantitative abilities were not as strong on a relative basis as my people abilities. And so it was really, for me, just focusing on what my super strengths, unique abilities really are. And that's, whenever you do that, that's where you're going to have the best chance of enjoying what you do and also doing really well at it.
Yes, I think that makes perfect sense. And a lot of us, I think we probably have that people skills, perhaps, growing up. But many of us have been kind of confronted with this new perceptions when we move to the UK, especially if they come from a different culture.
Yeah.
Then people see you differently. So it was almost like, how can we make them see what we are actually good at, beyond the culture and the language barriers, possibly.
Exactly. So, okay, this is really interesting because so I came from an American background. My parents were Chinese immigrants to the US. I grew up in the US and then came to England as an adult to come and run a business for Morgan Stanley at the time. And so you're really pointing out this really interesting part about what are the expectations? What are the cultural expectations of somebody? And you're right. So for me, coming in from America, I think it was confusing to people of what they could expect for me. They didn't know what to expect from me, right? I'm Chinese, so that's one set of expectations. And then I'm American, which is a completely opposite set of expectations. And the reality is I'm some kind of blend of those things. So I think a lot of it is just understanding what are those expectations? What are the assumptions people are going to make about you or me? So for me, I discovered that people were going to assume that being Chinese and being female together, people were likely to assume that I was going to be quiet, humble, very diligent and hardworking, for better or worse, those were all true. They also assumed I was going to be very good at math.
Yeah.
And smart. And, but probably not speak up, not make any waves, and be a really good worker. So I looked at that whole set of assumptions that people were likely to be making about me and realized that some of them were really going to be helpful. Like if people think I'm smart, wonderful. If people think I'm really great at math, but I'm not really that great at math, I'm not going to tell them, well, actually, you know what, the math thing, I'm not that good. I'm not going to tell them that. I'm just going to avoid jobs where I have to show being good at math. But then some of these others were terrible, like meek, not speak up, sit in the corner and just put her head down and do her job. So those were actually kind of true of me back then. And I had to really do a lot of work on myself and then on the perceptions of myself to change those, because those were not going to get me into higher and higher positions. Those were not descriptors of being a leader.
Absolutely. That's really, really interesting. And I think we'll explore some of the themes also later in the session, where we will talk a little bit more about, managing the perceptions and how to find our voices. But I think, just staying on your career at Morgan Stanley, I guess the second piece that's fascinating is getting to the managing director piece. Because I think you mentioned you had well over 10 promotions during your career there. So it would be great to really hear one of the milestones, which is to get to this kind of really senior management role at the first step. What are the key points that you think to make that promotion have happened for you?
Yeah, so I think one key point is having sponsors or having a sponsor. And sponsors are different from mentors in that the mentors give you great advice and you can have a lot of them for different areas of your career. But a sponsor is somebody who is senior enough, powerful enough to pluck you out of where you are and give you a fundamentally better opportunity. You know what? I'm just gonna have to shut my window. My gardeners are here. I forgot it's Wednesday. Sorry. Hold on one sec. This is real life kicking in, folks.
No problem. It's just a wonderful reminder that we're all in our real lives at the moment as well.
Yes. What are you going to do, right? My team's going to watch us and they're going to say, oh my God, come on, you're a professional. You should remember things like that.
No, we're only human.
Anyway, so let's just catch up where we were.
On the having the sponsor part, yeah.
Yeah, having a sponsor. I think that was really key. And the sponsor is somebody who's going to be able to advocate for you behind closed doors. And that's really essential. And the advocate, your sponsor, I've discovered it needs to be somebody who is in addition to your boss, in addition to your direct manager. When it's the direct manager, I discovered this when I was actually in the room making decisions as a senior person. And if the presenter was the direct manager, you go, okay, well, of course, the direct manager is going to say all those great things about the person that they're trying to get promoted. So it's really helpful to have that senior sponsor. And then the second thing that's helpful is to be known among lots of different groups, because you don't want your sponsor to be the only lone voice in the room advocating for you, and everybody else either is saying, May who is she? What does she do? Or, oh, you know, that mousy person who never says anything in the meeting and sits in the corner, right? So that's not helpful. So you want to make sure then that you've built your visibility, credibility, and a set of relationships with enough people in enough seats who can be around the room being a chorus of support. And then I think the third thing is that you want to be always demonstrating the potential to grow and do more at a next level. And so that's the difference between performance and potential. And oftentimes HR groups will have this 9-box grid. So it's one axis is your performance, and the other axis is your potential. And so they're looking for who's got high performance and high potential, because there could be somebody who's performing really well, but they're kind of as doing the most they can ever do, and don't have the potential to do more. So you need to be seen as somebody who can keep progressing.
Absolutely, that's really, really helpful, because I think on the point of having the sponsor, and I would assume typically that it's both a formal and a kind of informal process. I just wondered, because that's the question people always ask, how to find a sponsor. So if there are any kind of comments on that.
Yeah, so I did not discover that I had a sponsor until I had lost one.
Right.
Because I was going, hey, my career is zipping along really well. And all of a sudden it kind of went sideways. And that was because my sponsor left. So it's one of those things where you might even have a sponsor right now and not realize it. But to find a sponsor, I think the best way is to put yourself out there so that they can find you.
Right.
Because the sponsor is putting their political capital at stake. They're vouching for you. So they need to pick you and be comfortable to do that. And one of the ways I think you can be more systematic about it is to start looking above you and thinking about who might be a candidate. And I picked 2 to 3 possible candidates for sponsors. So a sponsor needs to be somebody in your organization because they need to be vouching for you behind closed doors, and external people usually can't do that. And they need to be senior enough. So they're going to be at least 1 or 2 or 3 levels above where you are now. And then just start building relationships with them. You can just do those relationship building sets of actions, and then see which people really resonate with you and who you really resonate with, and just allow nature to take its course.
Absolutely. I think what it highlights is really, it's a different type of learning from when we did at school, which is, you study for the exam, and then there is a right answer basically, and then the right from the multiple choice. Whereas here, the learning is not linear, and then you have to be much more resourceful, and then piece together the information from this non-linear kind of system. But I think that was really, really helpful. And I wondered, at the next stage in terms of your journey, how did that manifest into the senior management roles? Because if you're getting to managing director is tough, getting to the COO must be even tougher. I mean, just very, very few people could ever elevate to that position. And then also, I think, people get promoted because there are functionally excellent, whereas in management is mostly, your majority of the time spending on managing people, completely different skill sets. And maybe that ties in a little bit with your performance versus potential point as well. So I just wondered if you can share with us your thoughts and experience on this.
Yeah, so getting into senior management is a combination of having the ability to keep morphing yourself, keep transforming yourself, so that you're starting to think like somebody in top management. Because if you're not thinking in that way, if you're thinking primarily about the job that you're doing and how to do that, then you won't show up on their radar, on management's radar, as somebody who has the potential, who could sit in those rooms around the table in meetings talking about those bigger picture things that top management needs to focus on. Are you thinking strategically? Do you have the ability to envision what the business could be like? Are you an advocate for things that you believe in? Can they see you commanding a room? Do you have that credibility at that next level? And you're not just coming, it becomes very obvious when somebody puts their hand up in a big meeting and asks a question, and the question is a very tactical question, right? That says, oh yeah, they're just doing their job, which is great. We need people to do their jobs, but it doesn't show me that you can think at that senior top management level. So there's just all those things that you want to be demonstrating. And then secondly, you need to signal that this is something that you're interested in. And it's not saying, hey, I want to have your job in 18 months, senior manager. It's not like that. But it's talking about your aspirations and where you see yourself, and getting advice from these other top management folks who are going to be the decision makers on this, getting their advice on, if this is something I aspire to in the future, what do you suggest I would need to be doing now to prepare myself? So you're just putting yourself on the radar. And then there's also a bit of good luck that is involved. You need to be in the right place at the right time. And yeah, so if there are 12 people ahead of you who could be equally good at that role, and you're very much like all of them, then it's going to be a lot harder. And in my case, I didn't actually say I wanted to have that particular role, and it just sort of evolved from I had been doing, well, actually it might be useful to talk about the difference between a line role and a staff, line and staff role. And line roles are the roles in an organization that directly affect the outcomes that are supposed to be delivered. So delivering in investment banking, it's client facing, it's delivering revenue. And then staff roles are all the roles that support the people who are in the units, bringing in the main stuff that needs to be brought in, bringing in business, bringing in clients, bringing in revenue. And a line role in investment banking is also trading. because you're making money for the firm. Sales, because you're bringing in clients so that the traders have something to trade. So when you're in a line role, that is generally good. You want to be as close to the money, the revenue, the whatever the power raw material is that makes the company run. And it's just harder from a staff role usually.
That makes sense. Understood. And I think in a way that while we were getting more kind of functional excellence, and then it's important to cultivate, a wider range of skill sets. Seems like if there's any common theme, that every promotion there is that, matching the expectation gap, showing you could do more. And that more seems like, whether it's the understanding of the bigger picture or being more influential from your leadership skills or communication skills, it's just adding more building blocks to the existing kind of functional expertise that you're expected to do when you first join.
Yes. And actually, yeah, and I want to finish the answer to your question about getting into firm management. So in fact, for me, I was in line roles and I actually stepped off to take a staff role, which oddly, most people said, oh, well, we're going to count her out of the running now. Because there was a lot of congestion. If we think of a traffic analogy, it would have taken me a long, long time to wend my way up through the line roles. So what I actually did was something completely counter to the advice, the general wisdom, which is what I just gave you about line versus. And I took on a role, I was asked to do this role to help, it was called firm relationship management. We were establishing something a function that would cut across all the different business unit silos and bring everybody together around clients. And that really suited me well. And so this is an example of focusing on things that are part of your strength, things that really, really suit you well, because I always think it's playing in what I call the sweet spot. And that is the intersection between three circles in a Venn diagram. The first circle is, what are you great at doing? What do you love to do? So there's an intersection there. And then the third one is, what is valued by the organization? And so if you're playing in that sweet spot, then that is really, really where you want to be, because that's where you have the best chance to have people see what you're capable of and get to the level that you want to get to, or you feel that you can. So for me, that was in my sweet spot. But for most of my colleagues, they're going, what is she doing? She's committing career suicide. And, but that, and it might have been, right? It could have been, but I was very happy with that role. That role suited me perfectly. And it was all about navigating politics across different groups, getting them to collaborate around a common goal. And I didn't need to take credit. In fact, if I took credit, it would take credit away from all these groups who were trying to get to cooperate. So it just suited my personality really, really well. And doing that role happened to report to the chairman of Europe. And he saw what I could do, and he became a sponsor for me. And when he then was looking for a COO, he asked me to be in that role. So you can see that a lot of times it's this career serendipity, and it's more likely to happen, and you're more likely to have a really good time in life if you're operating in that sweet spot for you. It doesn't have to be what's right for everybody else.
There's just so much clarity. I love the three parts. I think it's that speaks to, we know our strengths, we know our values, but at the same time, I think what I've learned is very much that this is a very dynamic process, especially as you get further into your career. So, a lot of the expectations that we think is a linear progression, it doesn't seem to happen very often in real life. So we have to have a level of flexibility and go back to that core of the skill sets, as opposed to, how the role manifests itself.
Absolutely. And it's really well said. so to me, I think it's about being, knowing yourself, as you just said, really, really well. And then being a student of the environment, what's going on, which, as you said, is constantly changing, and you're changing too. You're learning and growing, and the environment's changing, and then figuring out what is your way to do things. You don't have to do things everybody else's way. So do it your way and make it work for you.
Absolutely. And let's move on also to your experience as a leadership coach, because if it's anything, this is amazing reinvention. As you mentioned, it's very different, but again, highly successful. Because I think the interesting part for me, at least, is this transition. So you leave the corporate world from a very senior position to be effectively an entrepreneur. So I would imagine like finding clients, building a brand, building networks, writing blogs. It just seems like a completely different set of skill sets again. So I wondered if you can help us understand a bit more about how you have approached these different roles, and then any tips on, for example, building a personal brand.
Yeah. So most people look at that and say exactly what you did, which is, it is very different from what I had been doing. And how do you make that leap? For me, it actually was that I was never meant to be a banker. Investment banking was very, very hard for me. And it almost burned me out, right? It was very, very difficult. It was a struggle. I was not a natural. But what I am a natural at, and what ultimately helped me once I got past those first handful of years where it was all about crunching the analysis and all the things that I wasn't so great at, it was when it became about the interpersonal interactions, the people, navigating through tricky situations, persuading, influencing. Those are things that are really natural. And for me, I'm so interested in people and what makes people tick, what makes certain groups more effective and successful than other groups. And so I really am now coming back to what I truly enjoy and love to do. And for many people, when I resigned, people were shocked. And I went to see one of the senior people. You want to stay in touch with your organization that you just left, because I left on very good terms. And they said, well, what are you going to do, May? And they sort of assumed that they said, I can introduce you to these private equity firms, to these hedge funds. They assumed that I wanted to stay in finance, but I really have very little interest in finance. Capital markets, I could give or take. Those are just the things that I did for a living. But so now I'm taking the piece that I'm really meant to take. And some people go, well, shouldn't you have done that right from the start? And I wouldn't have done it any differently, other than one thing. There's one thing I would do very differently, and if you're interested, I'll tell you later. But I wouldn't have done anything differently, because I now have a lifetime's worth of experience, often and mostly doing things the hard way, the wrong way. And I have all of that I can now bring to help my clients, to help you, all of you, help my audiences. And that's really what makes me excited, when I can help others be successful as you define success for yourself.
I think this is very inspirational in a way, because you shared about finding one's purpose. And I think perhaps in this new career, new adventure is much more aligned, but perhaps for people who are still in that kind of corporate world, there are ways that we can also, craft your job to be more aligned with your kind of interest, your purpose, because I think that is really what we will maximize our performance. It's hard otherwise to do 24 years of investment banking, I think. And then the other element I took from that is, again, there are different types of learning, and a lot of the learning can only be done through experience. So which is why I would imagine that was so necessary to get to, where you are.
Yeah, and I would say everything you're doing right now is preparing you for what comes in the future. None of it is wasted. None of it is a mistake. even my mistakes were super helpful, because it's just as helpful to learn what you're not interested in doing or what doesn't suit you as it is to learn what does. And what I found that has helped me be successful in transforming myself into this entrepreneurial career, because that's hard too.
Absolutely.
Institutionalized, and then you have to change. But what is useful is that all those skills that I developed are so helpful to me now. Like getting up, having any kind of meeting. I have had the toughest client situations, the toughest board situations. I mean, there is not a meeting that would knock me off my balance right now. And so it's all of that experience that I had, all the trials and tribulations, and all those skills that I've built. So I would say that you want to be leveraging your skills and your strengths. And the direction you use them in can look really different on the outside from what others think, but you're actually building off of your core base of strength.
Absolutely. And then to that point, you know, on the kind of building a personal brand, especially, you know, in your current role, it seems to be very, very important, if not more than, you know, your corporate career. How did you kind of find that experience?
Yeah, so the thing about this is I had to unlearn a lot of things. And unlearning is harder than learning.
Yes.
And so the things that I had to unlearn, one of the president of Arizona State University, you know, he said, "May, you've been institutionalized for 24 years.
Yes.
You need to uninstitutionalize yourself." So you have to start to just envision yourself as that new way. So I start talking about, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur now. I'm an entrepreneur. So I joined groups of entrepreneurs. I decided that my future lay in, if I wanted to help 1 million people, which is what I said I want to do, then I need to go online. And I knew nothing about going online. In fact, my whole career was don't talk to the press, don't be on social media, don't say anything to anybody, right? Assume everything that you do or say would go on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Do you still want to do or say that thing?
Very true.
And so I came from that kind of fortress mentality to now going, put yourself out there and not feel like you have to be perfect all the time. And that was really hard. So you want to surround yourself with the new kind of people. There's a guy, Jim Rohn, the late, great entrepreneur, and he was also a speaker and motivator and motivational speaker. And he said, you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So it's really around who do you surround yourself with. So the first thing I did was I tapped into, joined groups of people who were like what I wanted to become. And don't be afraid to invest some time and money in that. You know, I've joined several masterminds, and you learn from swimming in those same waters, and you learn from those peers. The second thing I did was I leaned into things that I enjoyed doing and was good at. So I've always been a writer. I wanted to write, I've always wanted to write a book. I finally did write a book, but so I decided I was going to write a blog. For other people, you might hate writing, but you might love podcasts. And so you might do a podcast instead, or maybe you like video. Most people are not going to like video, but some people do like video. And so you could just start to do that. Whatever it is, you want to be putting yourself out there where people can see you. And because you're always, it's like the law of attraction, you want to attract people to what you're doing. And as an entrepreneur, you're by definition excited about what the product or service is that you're offering, because you're creating something that you love. So your duty is to make sure others are aware of it. So so that's one thing I did, though, which is surround myself with peers who could help me just morph. The second thing was finding the mode in my case writing that was going to put myself out there, and also doing speaking. I love getting on stage and speaking. It's something I used to do when I was a kid, and I just sort of lost that willingness to do that when I was in my corporate career, and now I'm reusing it again. And then the third thing is not to try and go it alone. I teamed up with people. That doesn't mean that I went into business with them. You want to be very careful before you form a permanent, anything seemingly permanent in terms of a partnership, until you've had a lot of time to get to know each other. So another woman who was from Goldman, Catherine, she and I, Clayton, you might know
yes,
Catherine Clayton.
Of course,
yeah. So when she left, she and I left our respective careers around the same time. We're both interested in sharing what we knew to help people, especially women, but we both work with all humans. And so she said, you know what? So somebody introduced us, and we started just having lunch once a month. So that was part of my surrounding myself with people who were looking to do what I was going to want to do. And all of a sudden we looked at each other and said, gee, our updates sound really similar when we have lunch. Maybe we should try and do some of these things together. So we did. We just paired up. We didn't form a company or anything. We just started doing some things together. Ultimately, she decided she wanted to be more of a NED, a non-exec director, had that as her portfolio. And I went on to continue in doing what I'm doing. But that's one example. Another example is I hired somebody to do my website, my first website, and he turned out to be really experienced at online business. So he's now somebody who is my right-hand person in the business. So you don't feel like you have to go it alone.
Absolutely. I think that makes perfect sense. And then if anything, that highlights that, having that visibility is not only important, but also it's something that we all feel comfortable at times, but we can still do it. We can still navigate our way through it. Mm-hmm. So we don't have to have the perfect answers on day one. And then this is hard for everybody.
Yeah. And somebody said to me very early on that you want to think like the people who do software, like Microsoft or iOS, right? They've got version 1.0, they got version 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, 3.0, and so forth. So it's important to just get version 1.0 out there so that you can get some feedback on it and then improve it for version 2.0 and so forth. And not feel like, it's not like back at corporate where you want to polish it, make sure there's no typos, get it perfect before you send it out to the client. This is the opposite.
Exactly.
It's the minimum viable product and getting it out there. So this is what I'm saying, a lot to unlearn.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess it would be helpful if we just go back a little bit to that theme that we touched on previously in terms of managing perceptions, the cultural factors that goes into it. Because I remember one thing you have mentioned, which was really helpful, was, a great way to manage perception is create your own narrative. So I guess that highlights, how to use the storytelling in business, which we would love to know a bit more. The other thing that we touch on a little bit from our conversations, also this perception about, nice Chinese girls, for example. And then I think that speaks to about this kind of power distance. So, I certainly found myself feeling really uncomfortable around senior people. I don't know why. I think we're conditioned to be like that. So I guess it will be helpful just to hear a little bit more about creating that narrative, managing perceptions, and then find our voice, in the midst of all that.
Yeah. So on managing perceptions, one of my bosses said to me, or he liked to say, perception is reality. And I then realized that I learned that from my father when I was 14, and I had said something, and he said, you shouldn't say that. That it wasn't very nice to say to your father. And I said, well, I didn't say that. What I meant was this. It was like adding fuel to the fire. And he said, May, it's not really relevant what you think, you said. It's what I received it as. It's how I thought of it. It's how it landed with me, your father, that matters. And I just realized all those years ago, my father had been teaching me that perception, the other person's perception becomes your reality, because you have to deal with, I had to deal with my father's perception of my being impertinent, my saying something inappropriate to my father, which gets into the hierarchy thing that we're going to talk about in a minute. So yeah, and I think the important thing there is becoming aware of how things might be landing or are landing with other people, how they are perceiving it, without getting overly self-conscious about how people are perceiving you. So that's that fine line. You want to be aware, but have enough distance from it to regard yourself as a work in progress. And so this is just, it's sort of like bats or dolphins. They had send out these sonar signals and they get information back and then they course correct. So think of it like sonar, right? You're just, you're putting out, you're experimenting with saying something or doing something a certain way. Then you see how they react and go, oh, okay, I don't think I'm going to do it like that next time. Or, oh yeah, that was a good reaction. Let me do more of that. Let me understand how. So in managing perception, you're right. I believe in helping others form the right perception of you. And that can come in the form of how you speak, what you choose to say, and how you choose to frame it and say it. So for example, you can, all right, so one way in which I used storytelling and narrative really effectively, I have come to see, is there was a perception that I was afraid there was a perception that I, as a woman, was not going to get, did not need to be paid as much as my male colleagues because they were supporting their families and I was bringing in a second income. Because for all of my male colleagues at that time, their spouses, their wives were not either not working, or it was definitely this, oh yeah, I'm a part-time interior decorator, blah, blah. So I decided that and that was not the fact pattern for me. My husband's a high school teacher and a basketball coach at the time. So I decided that I was going to find a way to convey this. And somehow it came to me in this one situation, because you want to look for these pivotal moments when all eyes are listening on you, so that when you say the thing, you tell the story, lots of people have heard it, all right? And so for me, it was saying, hey guys, if I don't work, we don't eat. I'm just like you. And that one really just hit home. They're going, oh, okay, she's just like us. And that was true for me. So, but I think that really worked. I think another narrative that worked, and I discovered this in my interviews. So this is way back in my career when I was interviewing for my jobs. And I told a story, which is true. You have to always tell true stories about my background. And people were asking, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to be a banker? And I said, my family is full of people who have achieved a great deal. My grandfather was a judge. My great-grandfather, my grandfather was, no, actually I started with my father. My father is a very prominent scientist in his field. His brother is the head of the central bank, and his other brother is the minister of finance. And their father was the youngest president of a university, and his father was a judge in China. And yeah, I have a lot to live up to. And people instantly understood that and just made all kinds of assumptions, which were true, about how I was going to be and how I was going to show up. I am really, really driven. I feel like I'm the son of the family. You know, it's me and my sister, but I always feel like I have to uphold the family name and that sort of thing. And that's what I was able to convey. And I told it in this story. Instead of saying, yeah, if you hire me, I'm going to work really, really diligently because I am very, very driven and you will not regret hiring me, right? Those two things, different emotions. So you want to think about your own story. And at the same time, it revealed something personal about me. And they felt like, and they were getting a glimpse into who I really am as a human being. And that's really what people need in order to build trust. So you build trust through moments of appropriate vulnerability and showing glimpses of who you really are. So that's one way to use narrative. So I would think about what are the narratives that come behind your motivations and drives. What are the experiences that have made you who you really and truly are? You know, in the heart, in the soul, in the gut, who you really are when the chips are down, when things are tough, when your back is against the wall. What is the root of that steel inside of you? Everybody has it. And some of us need to do some digging to figure that out. And it may come from talking to people who've known you for a long time. Like sometimes it's my mom or my dad or my sister who just talk to me, tell me what was he like as a kid? What did I really want to do? Oh, you always wanted this, or you always knew that. And yeah, because one time I was saying to my mother, oh, Mom, you know, I still don't know what I want to do. It's decades later. This was just 2 months ago. It's like, I still don't want to do. Why can't I be more like my husband? You know, he does it just what he wants. My mother said, oh, May, you have always done exactly what you wanted. And then she rattled off experience, stuff. She goes, you wanted to go to Harvard? You went to Harvard. You wanted to get a job in this? You got a job in that. You did. You wanted to get married? You got married, right? It's like boom, boom, boom. I go, oh, yeah, thanks, Mom. Yeah, all right, I have. So now I can say, I have always done exactly what I wanted to do. It's like, just because I can't name it right now doesn't mean I'm not. So you can go and talk to people who knew you well. The other way I've used narrative and storytelling in business is in a much more, in client settings or where I'm trying to make a point and get people to see it. Sometimes coming up with just the right analogy or just the right vignette or story can land your point better than just using the Dr. Spock logic of it. So it's a combination of, I'm using Star Trek now. I used to watch Star Trek all the time. I don't know if people still do that, but there was this Dr. Spock who was all the logic, and then Captain Kirk, who was much more the humanist. And so it's finding that combination of the two to really appeal to people.
You know, that it's thank you for decoding this for us. There are a lot of really good examples there. And then I think one I walked away was that learning the self-awareness, you get lots of input from yourself, from others. It's like a learning process, accumulation of different data points for you to form that. And secondly is, you know, the most important thing is this human to human connection, be it in your personal relationships or in your business relationships. And then if you were able to help people see who you are using some of the stories, I think that, you know, trust does not happen at grand moments. It happens at these kind of small interactions, which is something I've learned, you know, from what you have just mentioned. And I think, you know, when we touch on these very interesting topics, an hour is never enough. But I want to draw this to maybe one last question, and then I'm sorry that everyone, we run slightly over. For people who wanted to hear the Q&A, we probably have 5-10 minutes extending from the current session. But I think the final question that I have is more on the being a minority at work, which you have touched on. And I think you mentioned there are certain advantages of being a minority. So maybe you can share with us, how can we, utilize that, leverage that, and then feel comfortable and bring the values that we're meant to.
Absolutely. So I think being a minority is wonderful. It is wonderful because immediately you stand out. I can't tell you the number of times I would show up at a meeting with a client and they go, oh, thank goodness it's not another set of 5 guys in the same suits and Hermes ties. So immediately you just stand out. And so then it's really about what you do with that. But it's a huge opportunity. And it's also a huge opportunity because automatically you bring a different perspective. So you can just start to tap into, okay, what is my perspective from somebody from a different culture where some of our clients may be from that culture, whatever, you craft it in a way that you can make it really something to leverage. And then you learn to say it in a language that the people in the majority culture will understand. And I think of that as, if you went to another country, if you went to France, you would speak French to be understood. And similarly, if you're from one culture and another culture, you need to say things a little bit differently so they understand. Well, great, learn that language. And it's still you, it's you learning that language, you speaking that language. So I think it's wonderful. And I remember I had a woman on my team who was saying that she really felt it was very hard for her as a woman in these client meetings and competing with our competitors. And I said, think about this, Alex, her name is Alexis. So I said, Alex, just think about the visual of how when you show up, you're going to be noticed versus, and I picked the name of one of the 100 white male bankers. I said, how hard it is for, I call him John, to stand out among all those others, not just within our firm, but everywhere else. So so he has to work doubly hard versus you. And that really, she said, wow, that's really cool. I'm going to own this. And so she went out there and rocked it. A lot of it is just how we frame things. And you want to frame it in the most powerful, energizing way for you, because our thoughts determine our behavior, which determine our results. So you want to choose your thoughts carefully. You're not responsible for the first thought that comes to your mind, but you are responsible for what you do with that thought. So leave you with that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think maybe it's a good opportunity for us to move on to some of that questions and then some comments which I can see from the chat box. I will just highlight a couple of them which I think seem to be very relevant for most people. One is on how to have a bigger picture perspective, especially when that is being shot down by your immediate manager. The other one is how to get to know senior management, especially as we work from home using Zoom a lot more. Perhaps we start with those 2 questions, if you don't mind.
Not at all. I'm just looking at this question. The first one, when your bigger picture perspectives is being shot down by your immediate manager. Okay, so what I would say there is there are ways. You should always be looking at the bigger picture. And when you're looking at the bigger picture, then and how your part fits into the bigger strategy, you don't have to convey that directly. All right, if it's freaking out your manager. So it might be the way in which you're conveying it. And it might come across, it's landing as threatening somehow, or you're assuming it is. And so it might be sometimes when you see something strategic, and you're pointing it out to your boss, it makes them feel perhaps like they're deficient because they didn't think of that thing. So if I'm posing it as, hey, you know what, we should really do this, that might be threatening to some bosses who are less secure. Maybe they're not so good at thinking big picture. So maybe you could use that big picture thinking in a different way to not talk specifically about that thing, but to say, to start operating in a slightly different way. Or you might demonstrate it to in other circles. So you got to figure out what are you trying to accomplish with your bigger picture thinking, and is telling your boss in the way that you're currently telling them the best way to do that. So it might be another way, like you might say to the boss, everybody likes being complimented, and it sounds like your boss might be a little insecure. It might be something like, you know, I really like that strategy that you talked about, or this project we're doing, because I can see how it fits into what the CEO said at the town hall yesterday. It makes me feel really proud to be working on something that taps in directly to senior levels. And maybe your boss isn't the person you need to demonstrate your bigger picture thinking to. You know, maybe you're going to surpass your boss one day, maybe some other folks, some senior mentors and so forth, which then brings us to this next question, which is it the one from Lorena?
Yes, how to talk to senior management effectively in the Zoom world.
Zoom world, yeah. So talking to senior management effectively, I think there's two parts of the question. One is how do you get in front of them? And two is what do you say to them? So I think the first part of how do you get in front of them in a Zoom world is you ask. And in fact, one of my clients said, wow, you know, it's been so great being remote, because now senior people don't think it's strange that I reach out, because everybody has to do that. So yeah, reach out. And then in terms of what you say, there's this great TEDx talk by Adam Galinsky, and it's about how to speak up. And he talks about this thing called the low power double bind. And what he's really saying is that each one of us has a range of acceptable behavior. If we behave within the acceptable range, then we get rewarded. If we behave outside the acceptable behavior range, then we get punished. Right. And so in a way, the person who just asked a question about, hey, I'm showing big picture, but my boss is punishing me. So it might be that you're operating outside the range that they expect from you. And so Adam Galinsky then goes on to talk about the fact that your range is not fixed. It can be changed. And so, and then he goes on to talk about several ways that you can go about expanding your range of acceptable behavior. And one of those ways with senior people, and I've also found this to be true, is to go and ask them for advice. People love to be asked for advice. Senior people love to be asked for advice. All people do. And Galinsky goes on to say, you know, he said, I am a researcher, and I know that asking people for advice is a way to get them to feel positive towards you. And even then, when I know that that's what somebody's trying to do, it still works. I feel more vested in the person. I'm thinking about them and their career. And so I would suggest that you approach people and ask for advice. And I wouldn't just approach one person, because if you approach one person, you know, if they say no because they're too busy or because 500 people have just asked them, well, you know, then you might go, oh, slink back into my corner and go, oh yeah, well, that didn't work. No, you go ask 5 people and you use the law of averages. At least one of them is going to say sure, right? And maybe you'll have 4 or 5 of them and you won't even have time to follow up. And you'll have to say, oh, how about in a month? Can we talk in a month? I'm really busy. So I would just go and do that. And I think that's the simplest thing with talking to senior people. So don't think it's all about you. Think of it as, think about them, think about the business, Senior people love talking about their own careers and giving you advice. They also love talking about the business. And that may be where you want to show that you are thinking bigger picture.
Very, very true. I love it. And then I think there is a lot of natural alliance we have with business, because I think, you know, to your point, coming from China, talking about career ambition is something that we're actually very familiar with versus maybe some people who are growing up here. And then also, you know, asking that advice, it goes back to, you know, a little bit like the hierarchical view we have with the leadership, but that plays very nicely that we ask somebody who seems more experienced with some advice. So it goes into some of our comfort zone, leveraging what we know from as well. But it's just hugely helpful. So and then there are some other questions as well. So I wonder, maybe you can tell us where we can find you. So if people have questions and they want to follow up, and then perhaps what would the best way to kind of follow your work and then be part of this 1 million community that you want to help?
Yay! Yes. So there are two things I'd suggest, and I suggest you do both. One is, if you want to continue the conversation, one is on my blog, my website, which is maybush.com. And there you'll find a way to sign up for my blog. I have weekly career advice that I send out.
I highly recommend that, by the way. That was amazing.
Thank you, Lynn. And on there, you'll also see that I have some other offerings and platforms. Career Mastery is one where there's career advice from not just me, but also a curated set of others. And that might be interesting and useful for some of you. And then the other place is, please go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'd be happy to accept. Just mention that you were on this call, and I'll be sure to have my team make sure that you and I are connected. And you'll also see a lot of my work there.
Brilliant. Thank you for being so open with us. And then I want to thank everyone for their time and participation. I mean, I have personally learned so much, you know, not only on the managing perceptions piece, the understanding the cultural factors, but this decoding process from someone who has done it. And then not just once, but twice. I just thought it was incredibly insightful. So I hope you walk away with some practical tips as well. But if you're interested in some other events, please follow the networks. So the UK Chinese Women Connect, which aims to connect, empower and showcase Chinese women in the UK. Chinese Women in the City, that promotes career development and self-growth for East Asian professionals. And the Lean In Circle, that connects and empower women in finance and promotes gender equality in the industry. And I know we have slides here for you to follow us on all kinds of social media platforms. So please do join the communities and then follow us on WeChat, on LinkedIn for more amazing events. But with that, I want to thank May, thank everyone, and then hope to see you soon.
Thanks so much, Lynn. Thank you, everyone. Wishing you great success.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.